The Galactic Academy was home to thousands of students from across the universe, but very few humans. Daniel Carter was one of them. He never expected to be special, just another student trying to survive his studies. But one rainy evening changed everything. Walking back to his dorm after a long study session, Daniel heard something in a dark alley near the Academy's south wing. A faint sound, like a muffled cry. He hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. That's when he saw her, a girl, barely standing, leaning against the cold metallic wall. Her cloak was torn, revealing shimmering violet skin beneath. Strands of silver hair clung to her face, damp from the rain. Her breathing was ragged, and Daniel could see she was injured. She wasn't human. Daniel froze, his instincts telling him to walk away. Getting involved in alien affairs was dangerous, especially for someone like him. But as the girl's glowing golden eyes met his, full of pain and fear, something inside him refused to leave her there. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked cautiously. She flinched at his voice but didn't run. Instead, her legs gave out, and she collapsed. Daniel reacted quickly, catching her before she hit the ground. Her body was cold, trembling. "You're hurt," he muttered, scanning her for injuries. A deep wound on her side was bleeding slowly, dark purple liquid staining her clothes. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. "Please, don't let them find me." "Them?" Daniel didn't have time to ask. A sharp noise echoed from behind. Distant shout, then the heavy sound of boots against metal. Someone was looking for her. Panic surged through him. He didn't know who she was or why she was being hunted, but one thing was clear: if they found her, she wouldn't survive. Making a quick decision, he pulled her arm over his shoulder. "Come on, we have to move." She gasped in pain as he lifted her, but she didn't resist. They stumbled out of the alley, heading toward the dormitories. The Academy's security drones hummed softly above, scanning the area, but Daniel kept his head down. He didn't stop until they reached his dorm room. He carefully placed her on his bed, breathing heavily. His heart pounded as he locked the door behind him. For a moment, there was silence. Then the girl spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "You are human." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." She stared at him, something unreadable in her golden eyes. "I shouldn't be here." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, well, you are." He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. But one thing was certain: his quiet student life was over. Daniel sat on the floor, staring at the strange alien girl lying on his bed. She was still breathing heavily, her wounds slowly healing, but her face was pale, and her body trembled from exhaustion. "Who are you?" he finally asked. The girl hesitated before answering. "My name is Zalira." Her voice was soft, but carried a regal tone, as if she was used to being respected. Daniel frowned. That name sounded familiar. Then it hit him: Zalira Valeri, the missing princess of the Valeri Empire. The news had been everywhere a few days ago. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and now she was here, in his dorm room, injured and running from someone. His stomach tightened. This was bad. Really bad. "You're the princess," he said slowly. Zalira's eyes widened in alarm. "You cannot tell anyone," she whispered. "If they find me, I am as good as dead." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Great, just great. So now I'm hiding a fugitive princess in my room." He shook his head. "This is insane." Zalira struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. "I did not ask for your help, human," she said weakly. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Yeah. Well, you would have blowed out in that alley if I hadn't stepped in." She fell silent, looking away. He could tell she wasn't used to relying on others, especially not a human. A sudden noise outside the door made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps. Voices. Searched the dorms. She was seen heading this way. a deep voice commanded. Daniel's heart pounded. If they found her here, he would be arrested, or worse. Thinking fast, he grabbed a spare blanket and threw it over Xalira. "Stay quiet," he whispered before moving toward the door. A sharp knock followed. "Open up. Academy security." Daniel took a deep breath and opened the door. 2 towering alien guards stood there, their glowing visors scanning the room behind him. "Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" one of them asked. Daniel forced a confused expression. "Unusual? No. I was just studying. What's going on?" The guard narrowed his eyes. "There's a dangerous fugitive on campus. If you see anything, report it immediately." "Got it," Daniel said quickly. "But, can I get back to sleep now?" The guard stared at him for a moment longer before grunting. "Fine, stay inside." With that, they turned and moved on. Daniel shut the door and let out a shaky breath. Under the blanket, Xalira's voice was barely audible. "Why did you lie for me?" Daniel looked at her, a mix of frustration and determination in his eyes. "I don't know. Maybe because I don't like watching people get hurt." Xalira studied him for a long moment. For the first time, a hint of trust flickered in her golden eyes. Daniel sighed. "Looks like I'm stuck with you now, huh?" Xalira's lips curved slightly. "It seems so human." Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his temples. His life had been normal just a few hours ago, but now he was hiding a fugitive alien princess in his dorm room. Xalira, still weak, leaned against the wall. Her golden eyes studied him carefully. "You should not have helped me," she said. Daniel scoffed. "Yeah. Well, it's a little late for that now." He looked at her, arms crossed. "So, are you gonna tell me why the entire academy is hunting you?" Xalira hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. But this human had already risked himself to save her. She had no choice. "My uncle is trying to take the throne," she finally said. "If I disappear, he wins." Daniel frowned. "So he sent people to kill you?" She nodded. "He made it look like I ran away. Now I am nothing but a traitor to my own people." Daniel let out a slow breath. "Okay, that's bad." Before he could say more, there was a knock at the door. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. His roommate, Torak, was back. "Yo, Daniel, open up, man." Daniel panicked. He looked at Xalira. "You need to hide." Weakly, she pushed herself off the bed and stumbled toward the closet. Daniel quickly threw some clothes over her and shut the door just as Torak walked in. Torak, a reptilian alien with deep green scales, looked around. "Dude, why does it smell so weird in here?" Daniel forced a laugh. Just cleaning supplies." Torak narrowed his yellow eyes. "Right." He sniffed the air again, but didn't push the topic. "Anyway, did you hear? The academy's on lockdown. Some big royal fugitive is running around. They say she's super dangerous." Daniel tried to act normal. "Yeah, I heard. Crazy, huh?" Torak flopped onto his bed. "Man, if I found her, I'd turn her in instantly. You know how much the bounty is." Daniel stiffened. "Bounty?" Torak grinned. "Oh yeah, they're offering 1 million credits for any info that leads to her capture." Daniel's stomach dropped. That was enough money to set someone up for life. If anyone found out he was hiding Xalira, he was dead. He forced himself to smile. "Well, too bad we'll never see her, huh?" Torak shrugged. "Guess so. Anyway, I'm heading out. Just came to grab my tablet." Daniel watched as Torak left. As soon as the door shut, he rushed to the closet and pulled it open. Xalira stumbled out, gasping for air. "That was uncomfortable," she muttered. Daniel ignored her complaint. "Did you hear what he said? 1 million credits. Do you have any idea how much danger we're in?" Xalira nodded. "Yes, that is why you must let me go." Daniel exhaled sharply. Not happening. Celira blinked in surprise. Why? Daniel met her gaze. Because I don't betray people who trust me. For the first time, Celira didn't argue. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the bounty. 1,000,000 credits. The idea kept swirling in his mind, even as he tried to focus on his studies. Every time he walked through the halls of the academy, his eyes kept darting around, paranoid that someone might recognize him or, worse, find Celira. For the past 2 days, he had been keeping her hidden in his dorm room. Torak had been suspicious, but Daniel was good at keeping secrets. They made up a cover story about Celira being a transfer student from a distant planet, but Daniel knew that wasn't going to hold forever. The pressure was starting to build, and Daniel felt the walls closing in. He couldn't keep lying to his friends. He couldn't keep hiding Celira. What if someone found out? What would happen to both of them? He was snapped out of his thoughts when his communicator buzzed. A message from Torak. Meet me in the common area. Urgent. Daniel sighed and grabbed his jacket. He needed a break from thinking about Celira's situation. Maybe talking to Torak would help. When Daniel arrived, he found Torak sitting at a table with another student, Kale, a tall alien with sharp features and dark, brooding eyes. Kale was from a wealthy family and always carried himself like he was better than everyone else. Hey man, Torak greeted with a grin. I've got something to show you. Daniel sat down cautiously. What's going on? Kale leaned forward. We know where the princess is hiding. Daniel's heart dropped. What? Torak gave him a sly smile. Yeah, we've been doing some digging. Turns out, a lot of people are looking for her, and we're not the only ones with connections. Daniel stiffened, his thoughts racing. He knew exactly where this was going. He could already feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. You found her? Daniel asked, trying to sound casual. Not exactly, Kale replied. But we have a pretty good idea. And if you tell us where she's hiding. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. We can make sure you get something out of it. Daniel's mind was spinning. The money, his future, the safety of Celira. If he turned her in, he'd be set for life. He could escape this small, cramped life he had at the academy. He could stop being just another student and live like someone important. But as the words formed on his lips, he saw Celira's face in his mind, her trust in him, her fear of being alone in a world that didn't care about her. No, Daniel said, his voice firm. I'm not telling you anything. Torak's expression darkened. You sure about that? It's a lot of credits, Daniel. 1,000,000. Daniel felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck, but he stood his ground. I'm sure. Cal's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. Without another word, they stood and walked away, leaving Daniel sitting at the table, his heart pounding. He had made his choice, but as he watched them leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed. The days following Daniel's refusal to sell out Celira were tense. Torak and Kale hadn't spoken to him much, and every time they passed him in the hall, Daniel could feel the cold judgment in their eyes. He didn't care. He had made his decision. But as much as he tried to stay focused on his classes and homework, the pressure kept building. His room felt smaller every day. Celira had begun to open up to him more, but her fear was still very real. She spent most of her time hiding in his room, too afraid to leave, and Daniel had started to feel like his entire life had become a game of hiding. One evening, as Daniel sat in the common area reading, Celira quietly approached him. Her golden eyes seemed troubled. I overheard something, she said softly, sitting down across from him. A group of my uncle's agents will be here by tomorrow morning. Daniel looked up from his book, his heart skipping a beat. What? How do you know? Celira clenched her hands together tightly. I heard them talking. They're looking for me everywhere. They think I've gone to ground at the academy. Daniel swallowed hard. They'll be here by tomorrow. She nodded. They'll come through the academy with a search team. I can't stay here much longer. His mind raced. They didn't have much time. If Celira was right, they were running out of options. There was nowhere on the campus that would be safe for her if the agents were already on their way. I'll figure something out, Daniel said, standing up quickly. Celira caught his arm, stopping him. Her grip was firm, but her voice was fragile. You don't have to do this for me. Daniel turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, I do. Celira looked at him, and for the first time, there was no doubt in her expression. She was starting to trust him. The fear that had clouded her eyes before was starting to fade, replaced by a quiet appreciation. You don't understand, human, she said, her voice soft. You've done more for me than anyone else in my life, but you're risking your future, your safety for someone like me. I don't know how to repay you. Daniel shook his head. You don't have to repay me. This is just the right thing to do. She smiled slightly, her lips curving in a way that made Daniel's heart flutter. Then I will trust you. If you can't protect me, I'll go, but I will trust you until then. The weight of her words sank in. She had chosen to trust him, even though she had no reason to. He wasn't some hero. He was just a human student, trying to survive his classes, but now his life had become so much more. He reached out, placing a hand on hers. We'll get through this, I promise. Celira's golden eyes softened as she nodded. I believe you. As they made their plans to escape the academy, Daniel realized something crucial. This wasn't just about saving Celira anymore. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. But whatever it was, he knew he couldn't back up now. Celira's trust in him was not something he would ever betray. The agents were closing in, but Daniel wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. The plan was simple, but danger lurked at every corner. Daniel and Celira had to leave the academy before the agents found her, but they couldn't just walk out the front door. The campus was surrounded by security, and a few hours ago, Daniel overheard a conversation about a full-scale search operation. Time was running out. Celira had insisted on not making a scene, but Daniel knew they couldn't keep hiding forever. He had to get her off the planet. And fast. The nearest spaceport wasn't too far from the academy, but getting there without being spotted would be nearly impossible. Are you sure you're up for this? Daniel asked as he quickly packed a bag with supplies, clothes, some food, and his communicator. Celira nodded. She was pale, but the fire in her eyes hadn't faded. I have no choice. I'll find us a way off this planet, Daniel said, more to reassure himself than her. Just as they were about to leave the dorm, a loud knock echoed through the door. Daniel's heart skipped. He motioned for Celira to hide, and she quickly slipped behind a closet door. Taking a deep breath, Daniel opened the door. Standing in the hallway were two academy security guards. Both were human, their eyes scanning him with suspicion. Can we help you? Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Just making sure everyone's all right, one of the guards said, his tone businesslike. You've heard about the fugitive, right? Daniel nodded, his throat tightening. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm just trying to study. The other guard, a tall woman with dark hair, gave him a sharp look. Stay inside, and don't open the door for anyone. We don't want to catch anyone aiding the fugitive. Daniel's mind raced. He was seconds away from being caught. He nodded quickly, stepping back to shut the door. The guards didn't seem to notice anything strange, but Daniel knew they were just doing their job. It was getting harder to hide. As the guards left, Daniel rushed to the closet. Celira was standing by the door, her expression serious. They're getting closer, Daniel said, his voice low. We need to move now. Celira didn't argue. She trusted him now. She always had, but there was a bond between them now, a shared understanding. They were in this together. They slipped out the back door, taking the narrow alley that led toward the underground transport system. It was their best chance. The alley was dark, and they kept their heads down as they hurried along. Daniel was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. They couldn't afford to be caught. The moment they reached the transport entrance, Daniel spotted the small shuttle that would take them to the nearby spaceport. He'd arranged it through one of his contacts, a shady individual who owed him a favor. Just as they were about to board, Daniel's communicator buzzed. It was an urgent message. "The Academy has locked down. All exits are being monitored. Get out now." Salira's eyes widened. It's too late. They've already locked everything down. Daniel felt his pulse race. They were running out of time. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the shuttle. There's no turning back now. As the doors closed behind them, Daniel took a deep breath. They were finally on their way to safety, or so he hoped. The Academy was a dangerous place, and the closer they got to the spaceport, the more he realized that escaping was only the first step. What awaited them on the other side? Would they ever truly be safe? Only time would tell. The shuttle soared through the atmosphere, leaving the bustling Academy far behind. Daniel sat across from Salira, his eyes scanning the stars outside the window. The quiet hum of the engines was the only sound in the small cabin. Salira, however, wasn't at peace. She stared at her hands, clenching and unclenching them, as if trying to control the storm inside her. Daniel knew the feeling. They were running, yes, but it wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about what they were leaving behind, and what they were moving toward. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. He couldn't help himself. He had to know what came next. Salira didn't look up at first, but her voice was soft when she spoke. "I should be returning to my homeworld. I should be reclaiming my throne. But I don't know if I can do that." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Salira looked up, her golden eyes meeting his. "You don't understand. I never wanted to rule. I never asked for this life. I just wanted peace. But my uncle, he's taken everything." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Then why not fight back? You're the rightful queen." Salira looked out the window, her voice quieter now. "It's not that simple. There are thousands of people depending on me. If I fail them, my people will suffer. But if I fight, I risk losing everything. I don't know what to do anymore." Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But you have to try. You can't just give up because it's hard. People are depending on you. Your people, your family. They need you." Salira shook her head. "I don't know if I can be the leader they expect me to be. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Daniel sat back, thinking. He knew she didn't see herself the way he saw her. To him, she wasn't just a princess or a queen. She was someone who had been running, hiding, trying to protect herself and others, all while carrying the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders. But she didn't see that strength in herself. "You don't have to be perfect," Daniel said, his voice steady. "You just have to be you. That's enough." Salira looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled, a small, hesitant curve of her lips. "You're the first person to say that to me. Everyone else just expects me to be something I'm not." "I'm not here to tell you what to be," Daniel replied. "I'm just here to help, and I believe in you. You don't have to do this alone." For a moment, Salira didn't say anything. She seemed to be considering his words. Finally, she nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes didn't completely fade. "Thank you, Daniel." The shuttle descended toward the spaceport, its lights flickering below them like distant stars. Daniel had no idea what awaited them on the other side. Would Salira be able to reclaim her throne? Would her enemies still be hunting them? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stop now. As the shuttle touched down, Daniel stood up, ready to face whatever came next. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. There was no going back now. Salira had made her choice, and Daniel had made his. They were in this fight side by side. And that was all that mattered. The shuttle's engines hummed softly as it settled onto the dusty ground of the spaceport. Daniel's heart was pounding, his mind racing. They had made it this far, but this was just the beginning. The spaceport was bustling with activity, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on them. They had to act fast. As soon as the shuttle's door opened, Daniel motioned for Solira to follow him. They quickly moved through the crowd, keeping their heads down. Solira had her hood pulled low over her face, trying to blend in with the other travelers. But Daniel could feel the tension between them. This was their last chance to escape. "Where do we go now?" Solira whispered, her voice tight with worry. "I have a contact here," Daniel said, glancing over his shoulder. "He'll get us a ship off-planet. We can't stay here long." They moved through the spaceport, weaving between cargo containers and travelers. Daniel's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the crowd. He knew that Solira's enemies would be looking for her, and they wouldn't waste time. Every step they took brought them closer to danger. Solira was quiet, her thoughts elsewhere. She had always carried the weight of her people on her shoulders, but now, with her uncle still on the throne, everything was uncertain. Could she really go back? Could she really face the people who had betrayed her? "You'll make it through this," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing in his own mind. He wasn't sure how they would survive this. He wasn't sure how they would even escape. But one thing he knew for sure: he couldn't leave her now. Solira glanced at him, the faintest of smiles appearing on her face. "Thank you, Daniel. I never thought I'd be running away from my own people." Daniel didn't know how to respond. He couldn't imagine what she was feeling, her entire life turned upside down, everything she thought she knew ripped away. But he could understand the pressure, the weight she felt. They reached the back of the spaceport, where a small freighter awaited them. The ship was old, its hull dented from years of travel, but it would get them out of there. Daniel's contact, a scruffy alien named Rock, stood by the ship's ramp, waiting for them. "Hey, you two," Rock greeted, looking over his shoulder. "You've got 10 minutes before they lock down this whole place. You better move fast." Daniel nodded. "We're ready." Solira followed him up the ramp, her steps quick but hesitant. She looked back at the spaceport, her gaze distant, as if saying goodbye to everything she had known. Inside the ship, the doors slid shut behind them, and the engines roared to life. As the ship began to ascend, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. They were finally leaving, but he also knew that they weren't safe yet. "We'll find a place for you," Daniel said, looking over at Solira. "Somewhere far away where you can figure out what to do next." Solira nodded slowly. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't know what I would have done without you." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't doing it for praise. He was doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. The only thing to do. The stars outside the window blurred as they broke through the atmosphere, leaving the planet behind. They didn't know what awaited them, but for the first time, Daniel felt a sense of peace. They had each other, and together, they could face whatever came next. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they were ready, and that was enough. The freighter flew smoothly through the vastness of space, the stars outside a blanket of endless light. Inside the small ship, Daniel and Solira sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Solira gazed out the window, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. Despite the moment of peace, there was an undercurrent of tension. The universe felt so wide and so small at the same time. She had never imagined she would be on the run like this, leaving behind everything she had known. Her empire, her people, her family, now all distant memories. "Where will we go?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Daniel sat next to her, his fingers tapping lightly on the control panel. "We'll find a place. Somewhere safe." He didn't have a concrete plan. He had hoped for more time to think, but the situation had escalated too quickly. They couldn't go back to the academy, not with bounty hunters and agents closing in. They needed a fresh start, away from everything. Zalira looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I don't know what to think anymore. I thought I knew my future. My life was already planned out for me. But now, she shook her head. Now I'm just lost. Daniel turned toward her, his expression serious. You're not alone, Zalira. You don't have to figure this out on your own. For the first time in a long while, Zalira felt a flicker of hope. She had been so focused on running, on surviving, that she hadn't let herself think about what came next. She had trusted people before, only to be betrayed. But Daniel, he was different. He had stood by her, no questions asked. What happens if we can't go back? She asked, her voice quieter now. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then we find a new path, one that's just for us. The words hung in the air, both comforting and uncertain. Daniel had no idea what the future held, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of determination. They had come this far. They had fought for each other, and now they would continue to do so. As the freighter glided through space, the sounds of the ship's engines humming in the background, Daniel thought about the future. Zalira wasn't just a princess to him. She was someone who had fought to survive, who had endured so much. And now, it wasn't about her title. It was about who she was. A person. A friend. I believe in you, Daniel said quietly, looking at her. You'll figure this out, and I'll help you. Whatever it takes. Zalira's eyes softened. Thank you, Daniel. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing for the first time in days. The weight of the crown, the burden of being a ruler, had been heavy. But now, with Daniel by her side, she didn't feel quite so alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something new. Something better. The freighter continued its journey into the unknown, carrying them away from the dangers of the past and toward the possibilities of the future. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, they felt like they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together. And that was enough. The freighter drifted through the stars, its engines humming steadily as it made its way toward an unknown destination. The journey had been long, and the weight of uncertainty was still heavy, but for the first time since they had fled the academy, Daniel felt a sense of calm. Beside him, Zalira stared out the window, her golden eyes following the distant lights of the galaxies. Her posture was more relaxed now, less guarded than it had been since their escape. She had stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped worrying about who might be following them. In a way, the vast emptiness of space had become her new home. I've been thinking, Zalira began, her voice soft. Daniel glanced over at her. About what? I've been running for so long, she said, her gaze never leaving the stars. I didn't know where to go or who to trust. But now I realize something. She turned to face him, her expression serious. I don't want to keep running anymore. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I don't need to go back to the throne, she said, her voice steady. I don't need to be a ruler or a princess. I need to find a place where I can be myself, where I can live without looking over my shoulder. She paused. And maybe I can start over. Daniel watched her, the quiet strength in her words settling over him. He had always known that Zalira was more than just a princess, but hearing her say it out loud made him realize something else. She had been searching for freedom, not just for herself, but for everyone she cared about. I'm with you, Daniel said, his voice filled with determination. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Zalira's golden eyes softened as she looked at him. Thank you, Daniel. I don't know what I would have done without you. The words felt like a promise, a bond that had been formed between them in the fire of danger and the darkness of uncertainty. They had both risked everything, and now there was no turning back. Daniel had always thought of family as something he didn't have, a distant idea, something for other people. But now, as he looked at Zalira, He realized that family wasn't just about blood or royalty. It was about trust, loyalty, and the people who stood by you when the world seemed to fall apart. Salira might not have a crown or a throne anymore, but she had something far more valuable, the strength to choose her own path. And Daniel had something too, a new purpose. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a protector, a friend, and someone who had made a promise to stand by Salira no matter what. As the freighter flew through the endless night, Daniel looked out at the stars. There were still so many unknowns ahead of them. They didn't know where they would end up or what challenges they might face. But for the first time, it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. In that quiet moment, Daniel realized that he had gained more than just a friend. He had found a family.